welcome to a new episode with the CG Pills, and this is chapter 1. We made the first video at the beginning, which was very introductory to explain this project. Then actually we took a bit of time because we released some videos related to GeoGen of the GFX, so we also started a training course within the software. We will carry forward both processes to try to give you also other types of videos and other types of information. Today we want to go into a little more detail specifically about what is the job of the CG artist. So let's try a bit of creating something a bit more specialized, and that can give us some information. Obviously, we're not aiming with these videos now to explain everything, but we're just trying to set some points for then we can talk about it a bit more precisely, a bit more detailed. Subsequently, when we then work within the software and explain better how things work. We saw my reel last time. This is an updated version. There are other projects. I am restarting it simply because I want to introduce another speech. If we see an arrival of this type, you will have seen many. And anyway, you have seen maybe the making ofs of the various companies that do special effects and whatnot. What you see is very beautiful, exciting, very interesting, and you'll always be happy. Very impressed by what you see inside the special effects, and perhaps it will also understand that some people, they hide behind these images, so maybe even impressive, sometimes making them as I can tell you, a representation of oneself and of what is really the level of skill and one's own level of ability. The discourse, however, is quite different, and it's something I care about. What you see inside of a reel like this is indeed more complex. I've removed it because it's not that important. So computer graphics today are actually a bit everywhere. As you can see represented on this card, we find them in films, we find it in the cinematics of video games, we find it in real-time engines within video games, we find it in commercials, and we even find it in projects perhaps related to virtual reality. It is used in theme parks and whatnot, hence there are really a lot of markets now using 3D, 2D computer graphics or whatever. Is definitely something that, as you see, has expanded a lot, so it's something you can find everywhere. But it's important to understand that what you see is always a team effort. Although the effect is grand and the scene is executed so fantastically, discovering these reels of artists that appear impressive, you must always remember there's work behind it that's not done by just one person, but from a very complex team. Not only made up of artists, but also people who manage the project. So it's a job quite complex, not only from an artistic and technical perspective, but also from an organizational one. A series of artists with very high skills. And from skilling, if they are not organized, they do not lead anywhere. So it's a thing which I care about because it's a completely different aspect of this work that definitely needs to be understood and should become part of your mindset. To be able to have a success and a better career, on this card, we see represented more or less what are the departments of computer graphics. I've put some are covered by the webcam, but anyway, there's the department that takes care of development, there's the department that takes care of animation, the one of lighting, of modeling and whatnot. In every department, there are 2D and 3D artists, so CG artists or VFX artists that we want to call it if they only deal with special effects or computer graphics specifically. I wrote it's bigger in 2D and 3D because that can be the initial macro subdivision. Artists doing 2D, artists doing 3D, and then some in between, and we'll get to know each step. And I've added some figures found in a project like the ones we've seen, be it a video now, a video game, a movie, or whatever. There are those who deal with texturing, so we will understand. An ink. What is it about generalist artists? So artists who still have a somewhat more general knowledge, so they deal with somewhat more general aspects. Artistic production only requires materials, surface features of objects, someone who makes models, someone who... There's a whole series of effects tied to character animation, so rigging character effects. There are those who deal with layout, so defines the basic structure of a scene, and so the placement of objects, camera placement, and whatever else settings. There are those who only deal with effects, those who only deal with lighting, and those who do the composing. So there are a lot of roles. Often this creates confusion at the beginning, because maybe one would also like to understand what one wants to do, because one says, I would like to become a CGF, a CGF, or a bit of a text artist. But then what specifically do I want to deal with is something that it's not necessarily something you can know right away, but there are paths, there are situations that also help you in deciding this. And then it depends, you can also decide for yourself, based on your predisposition, your skills, what you like most. All this to get, you see here, to a very messy structure of connections, because then in reality, their workflow, so the flow of work within the team is a complex animal. There are obviously interfaces to various, among various departments, among various artists. Imagine that every single thing has to move within the team among different figures, different departments. Let's make routes to finally reach the end. Maybe we start with a film, then a script, and finally what you see at the cinema. Everything in between, at least as far as computer graphics and special effects work is concerned, is very complex, because you have to go through a whole process, which is the workflow. So the workflow, yeah, in many steps. So that's why it takes months of work. It requires many people. It requires a very solid structure and a level of organization and control of the work, very well organized. Okay. This is an image I took from the Cave Academy, so it's not mine, but it gives an idea of the diagram of how things move. So there are various departments. There is the previs, the tech beats, then the plates that are still the, let's say, the live camera shot, the assets, the things that are built. Then there's the camera, the tracking, rotoscoping. There are all the phases that intertwine with each other and show a bit of the journey of how things move between the various departments. One thing that perhaps isn't mentioned here, but I want to add, is that often these arrows don't go in just one dimension. You see they shift here, move between a discussion within part of the workflow model team towards the next one, and so continues this form of movement until we arrive at the finalization, having the finished product in production. Then it's not just like that. In reality, things also come back, then they are modified, then they are refined. New versions of them come out. So imagine these connections. As you can see, for this first one, I put a very complex system of connections. The process is much more complex than what you see here. So this certainly defines a flow of information that starts from one point and goes up to the finalization, but then within this workflow, things get even more complex, even more articulated. And that's why I tell you, it's also very important, the organizational part. We have seen many roles before work, but we must never forget the producers, those who deal with production, team organization, management. Information flows are simply knowing, for example, how a certain task is progressing. Consider that there are software that handle production, but there are always people behind it. And so imagine that the team is certainly organized on artists within each department, and therefore each type of artist, then there are some divisions at the skill level. So I've represented a few. For example, see, the junior artist is someone who is just starting out, right? So they have surely no or little experience. We have, for example, senior artists who are senior, so they are older, have a certain seniority, they have a series of productions behind them, so definitely they will have a given skilling, not only of technical abilities, because even a junior artist can have very high artistic technical skills, but it's about experience. So having worked on certain productions, having met certain problems also with the possibility of managing other people, so managing other artists to accomplish certain tasks. We have the leads, who are obviously those artists who obviously have experience and who are in charge of a certain, so for example, we might have lighting artists who are the artists working on the lighting. Then we have the lead lighting artist, which is the one in charge and will certainly manage the team under him, but also a series of the setup is a series of situations that are his responsibility and that maybe normally are not given to a junior artist for experience and whatnot. And then we have the supervisors, the ones who stand even higher and have to at different levels, so supervisors of some WFX that needs to supervise the entire workflow and also give the okay or not when going freelance to determine if something is good, approved, if it needs to be modified or whatever else. Within all this vertical flow, within the team, as I said, there are producers, so people who have to take care of production. There are production supervisors, people who they speak multiple times a day, every day with the artist to understand the progress of a certain task, to see if there are any issues that then need to be communicated at other levels, because maybe it was set a certain deadline to obtain a certain effect to show to the supervisor, but then a problem arises and the producer must take care of, reorganize this situation, therefore passing information to another part of the workflow, to other people inside the team, and perhaps reorganizing the work to allow the flow. It does not stop, or at least that issue does not create other issues in a cascade, or that the problems or things that need to be modified, changed, reorganized, all happen in the shortest time as possible to optimize the... There are fewer problems within the team for the artists, for the supervisors, for the leads, and for the squad. Contact, as you can see, it's a situation, a very complex chart one might say, but it works in all directions, vertically, horizontally, and moves forward and backward in time among the various departments. So it's a situation, it's definitely one of the nicest jobs from my perspective that exist, but it's certainly something to be taken seriously, and that it has to be managed and organized in right way. Organization is a fundamental piece. I can have 100 of the best artists, but if they are not organized or if they work in a disorganized way, a production can completely collapse. Okay, this doesn't mean that you don't need to have skills, but it's about having the skills, having the ability, production and ability to work in team, the ability to also be subject to control by others, the ability to listen, to interpret what is being said by the producers, artists are led by their colleagues, but also by those who are considered lower. Because sometimes a great idea can even come from the junior artist who actually has no experience. It's a job that involves a lot of communication and open-mindedness as far as I'm concerned. It's not based on the first women, those artists who believe having undergone a certain work journey to be who is who, to be, maybe they've become something special or unique. It's a team job. So every link in the team is important at all levels, okay? But how do you become a CG artist? What are the paths? I briefly told you in the first chapter that when I started, actually the only possible way was to learn by myself, so self-taught. So find the software you could use at that time. Fortunately, in some ways, at the beginning, I started with open source software, but it didn't have a graphical interface. You had to write everything in code to be able to define a scene, but it allowed me to get on this path and understand a bit more. I try out the first things, but keep in mind that at that time there really weren't books, there was no internet, so let's get started. We are talking about a time when there was the BBS, there was no internet. So you will understand that the level of information and sharing also, because there were few people who they start to introduce this concept of the completeness of the graph and special effects. It wasn't easy, obviously. It wasn't even easy to get in because there were really few software. Some on, I'll mention names of hardware or software that some people may know, while others may find them very old, because we're talking about things from 30 years ago. The computer graphics software, some existed on Commodore's Amiga, others existed on Atari ST, from Atari, and on PC it came because they were not high-level software on sites with graphics. So maybe we're talking about soft image, software from Alias, Wavefront, etc., but initially only Alias and only Wavefront. So we're really talking about a bit of the prehistory of computer graphics. 3D Studio, so no 3ds Max, what maybe you heard or know. 3D Studio on MS-DOS platform. So we are not talking about Windows, we're talking about before Windows existed. It was the first high-level software that came to PCs, allowing many people to come out to learn in addition to the software that were there, like imagine like Lightweb or others on her friend, for example, okay? And this software give an interface. Some of these are extremely powerful, and so, but the talk was always about maybe grabbing the software manual, reading it, really volumes and volumes of manuals, truly hundreds and hundreds of pages, and trying to understand something that was perhaps completely unknown. What are UVs, texturing, how do lighting, modeling, and whatever else work? There was nothing. Today the situation is different. There are computer graphics schools, there's the internet, so there's YouTube, online school, free tutorials, so there's really everything. And it will also change the software situation. Then we'll talk about it in chapter 2, which will be another video. Very important chapter that I care about. So here the discussion becomes a bit about learning by oneself. So as an autodidact or go to school at least, this largely depends on personal choice and partly on a purely economic issue, because schools, especially abroad, really cost a lot. And it's a big problem because there are very, very good schools abroad, but they really cost a lot. There are some quite interesting schools here in Italy with somewhat more affordable costs. Surely it's always a hefty investment for families, and then it's not easy to understand what the path can be at the beginning and how to move. And often, unfortunately, you also fall into unpleasant situations or in situations where time and money are invested but then lead nowhere. Often I remember my students in various situations where I have taught, they felt a bit lost. But in the end, no, because they had invested time and money. They were there a bit suspended in the situation. Yes, I learned some things, but now what do I do? We with CGPLs, but also with other projects we are working on, will try to give some support to this type of situations. Remember that CGPLs is completely free, so at least this part is not for profit. Let's say purely economic, then obviously we are a structure that must also deal and make money, so we also open paid courses. So I'm not here to say that we are there are saints who will only try to help you for free. We just try to do both things. And investing in schooling abroad can become very burdensome because there's the transfer, you're there for months or even years. You have to pay the expenses to live abroad. Schools really cost a lot, but maybe they give a bit easier outlets than for the work world abroad. So it's all pretty complex, but there's also the possibility to learn on your own, especially since today there are really many sources. There are many software and they have become very powerful. We have paid online courses at very affordable prices. There are many types of free tutorials, and obviously it's not easy to understand what are the right ones, what are the highest quality ones. So I understand that there too is a time investment, not so mild that the time required to learn is not so low. But it's never so little the necessary time, also because in this job, like in many other jobs, you never stop having to study and learn, okay? I've been working for 30 years. And for about 35 years, I've been dealing with computer graphics. Even today, I'm still studying and learning new techniques, new software, new tools and whatnot. It never ends. And this is one of the very beautiful aspects that make it so interesting. So this is another possibility. We recommend Pizza and others. And the masterclass we will prepare, we will try to be a support for this part here. A bit of a middle ground between learning on your own using the score, oil fridge, and maybe some low colored masses. It's a bit like entering an online school and then serving with higher level masterclasses, but trying to create, at least to help that part of the market that maybe it's hard to understand the path, which anyway can't invest. Who knows how many thousands and thousands of euros in this way, but also once get to see a path that anyway, it leads somewhere in fairly short times. We always remember fairly short. Because if someone imagines wanting to become a VFX artist within 2 months, learn everything and live and work in Hollywood and have a great career, I don't have to say this. Let it go like this, okay? It's something that always needs to be organized, planned and managed in the right way. We will see in the next chapters other information regarding purely initial and purely theoretical aspects, this type of work, and then we will start working with free paths. As I told you, introductory and in some of the most used software in various fields, not only pure special effects, but we will also take care of other markets. As for this chapter, we also stop here, as always, as usual, not to give you too long videos, too heavy to listen to. No? Thank you again, and we'll talk in the next few days for the next chapter to try and close this path more or less introductory. Thanks to everyone.